Hey everybody, welcome back to the Winning Digital Customers Livecast. I've been off for the month of August, and you probably noticed you were listening to reruns of some of my most widely watched episodes from the course of the prior year. I've been at the shore, the Jersey Shore. I let my beard grow out. I was relaxing, but now I'm back and ready to go for the fall, rocking and ready. And I wanted to talk today about Labor Day. Of course, we just had Labor Day a couple days ago, but I thought, it's such a fascinating time to talk about work since there's been so much transformation in the world of work lately, very, very recently, as a result of COVID, but frankly, over the last couple of decades as well. You might notice it's a little unusual. I'm wearing a suit today. The reason is it's not that I'm going formal. It's not my new fall resolution, but rather today also is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. So I've just come back from synagogue. And so it's an interesting day to be talking about work because on the one hand, we just had Labor Day. And on the other hand, today, Rosh Hashanah, for those who are Jewish anyways, is a day where you're generally not supposed to work. It's a day of rest. So work, no work. Anyway, that's our theme for the day. And actually, that balance of the question of human work or, working more or working less, that's what we're going to focus on today. And let's go forward and you'll see what I mean. So first of all, I have to admit that I don't really know, or I should say I didn't really know where Labor Day came from. It's one of those holidays. I think we all have a good idea of what Columbus Day is all about or what Thanksgiving is all about. But Labor Day is one of those holidays that I think to a lot of people seems to be mostly about a barbecue and that transition from summer to fall to going back to school. But what is it actually a holiday that we're celebrating? Well, here's the answer. It's really celebrating kind of two interrelated things, both related to the American worker. First of all, it's a moment to appreciate and acknowledge the contributions of the worker. So often in our world today, those that get all the glory are the leaders, the visionaries, the Steve Jobs or the Jeff Bezoses or whatever else. But Labor Day is in part a day to remind ourselves that all the accomplishments of our world, of our society, are not only the result of somebody who's at the top of the food chain, but of all the people who are getting things done every day. So if you're getting your Amazon packages, Labor Day is a day to remember that, it's not Jeff Bezos only to thank for that. If you're getting your Starbucks coffee, it's of course not only Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, but those people who get up early every day, make your coffee, work in the warehouses, pick your requests from Amazon, drive your trucks, all those kinds of things. So that's part of what Labor Day is about, a moment to just appreciate, if you will, the worker. But also, it is a celebration of the progress and advancements for working people in this country. Because when Labor Day was established, what had happened was, in the 19th century, right before 1900, most workers in the United States were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that sort of gradually let up. And it was only by 1926 when Henry Ford was really the leader in establishing the idea of the 5-day work week. Of course, Jewish, speaking of Rosh Hashanah, Jewish history and the Torah and the Bible tell us, of course, to have 1 day of rest a week, right? Which has been interpreted over the years. Jews generally take Saturday as that day of rest, Shabbat. Christians refer to it similarly, the Sabbath, and generally they take that day on Sunday. But there's this religious idea of taking 1 day off. But it was Henry Ford who said, I'm going to give my workers 2 days off. And around the same time in the early 20th century, you also had a lot of labor unions and legislation that limited the work week. So people were no longer being asked to work 7 days a week, and they were also no longer being asked to work 12 hours a day. And this is around when you have the establishment of limits, 40, 45, 50-hour type work weeks. And so reducing the amount of time that workers had to work. And Labor Day is in part meant to be a celebration of that progress for the worker of being able to have a balanced life, right? Today we talk so much about the idea of work-life balance. So that's the origin of Labor Day, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to know, particularly as we're at this moment where very often we have technology taking over for roles that were, sort of technology in some cases replacing human labor. We have concerns about unemployment, underemployment. At the same time, we have a labor shortage. So there's a lot of interesting things going on around now with labor that I want to talk about today. So, and we want to talk a little bit about that history, just because I think it's always interesting to look at the future in the context of history. Sometimes the way the world is now feels, it's like, I think this natural human psychological tendency to see it as, well, this is the way it's always been, even though we know it's not true, but it's a good opportunity to periodically remind ourselves, and holidays are a good chance to do that, that, yeah, we're actually on this evolutionary curve, or this progression curve of things that have been changing. The way it is now is not always how it's always been. And quite probably in the future, it's not going to be the way it is now. So the idea of the 5-day, 40-hour work week was not written in stone at the dawn of time. And who knows, as we see some changes, and I want to talk about this a little bit at the end, maybe that's not the future is either for the future of work. And of course, this idea of the future of work is also a term I hear a lot lately in the context of all of the changes we've seen from COVID, because we've learned that particularly office work, white collar work, knowledge work can be so effectively done by people in remote locations using Zoom and Slack and other tools to manage their collaboration and their work, that it's made a lot of people rethink what work means and where work needs to be done, et cetera. So I want to go back, though. I want to just remind us a little bit of the history of work, which we'll do very, very briefly. And then I want to make some comments about what does that seem to me. We're at a moment of particular sort of turning point, it seems, is another chapter of what the work world looks like, maybe beginning, or we may be transitioning into. So, if you rewind the clock, thousands of years, in the early days, what was work? Work was what each person had to do to live, right? If you needed some rocks moved, you were moving rocks. If you needed to get to hunt or to farm, it was mostly people doing the things they needed to do, washing their own clothes, dealing with their own way of getting food, patching their own roof, the work that you had to do as yourself or a family to live and survive. And of course, that was work in the early days. And then things evolved, and you had more societies, and you had division of labor. And now you had somebody who might own a farm and hire people to work on the farm and give them a portion of the farming proceeds, and someone else who maybe made clothing, and someone else who was another kind of an expert. And now you had people who didn't try to solve all of their own needs through their work, but were more specialized. And then they would either initially with goods through barter, and then of course at a certain point currency came along, and we had people being able to trade with each other, moving on to people having some kind of standard currency. So I didn't have to find somebody who wanted my plums that I picked in exchange for some new shoes. I could just sell them for money and then find somebody who had the shoes to pay the money. So all this, of course, but just as a reminder that we've had this evolution of how work worked. And then of course we had, I'm skipping many, enhancements or evolutions, no doubt. But of course, we then moved on to a world in which we had various tools. Oh, sorry, I just realized my slides are not full screen. Let me fix that for you there. No sense in seeing my menu bar at the top of the images. Anyway, so we then moved on to a world in which we had tools, and of course those tools over time became more and more sophisticated, from just early horse-driven plows to now tools that allow, and this is the key thing, one person to do a much greater amount of work. Right? We saw increases in productivity. So, and of course, as we look at the evolution of work, that went, and you look at factories and allowing one person to operate a machine that could be a loom, for example, to make fabric, where, if you were doing it manually, you'd need dozens and dozens of people to create the same amount of fabric. And of course, the extension of that then becomes robotic automation or other kinds of nearly automated factories. In other words, the continuation of the idea that we can get at least this type of physical work done, whether it's manufacturing or farming or things like that, with less and less human involvement, and more that can be done by various types of automation, robots, et cetera. And, of course, now, and that's been at different times, different jobs, right? For example, you might have said, well, sure, maybe a robot can make the car, but only a human can drive the car truck, one of those big car trucks that has 10 cars on it that's driving to the dealership. But of course, now autonomous vehicles, we're seeing more and more that may be something that even today it's still needed. We can kind of see a future of work where the human doesn't necessarily have to drive the truck. And so less and less human labor is needed to manufacture a car, to put the car on the truck, to drive the truck to the dealership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, more and more people are using websites to buy cars. So you see this evolution of work where the same amount of human work gives you more and more productivity, but what that also means fewer and fewer hours are needed by workers, to achieve the result, right? Whether it's getting a car manufactured and sold, or cultivating a crop and getting it to the grocery store and getting it onto people's plates, etc. Now, of course, this does create some new types of jobs. There's sort of an old joke that, eventually every human on the planet will have only one job, which is robot repair, I'm not predicting that, but of course it is true that it creates new jobs in technology, creating these technologies, maintaining and operating these technologies, fixing these technologies. But at the same time, the number of people that employs is, of course, far, far fewer than the number of people that are replaced by the technology. And, we'll talk a little bit about, is that good? Is that bad? But that's certainly what's been happening. There's no question about that. Now, of course, there are some types of jobs that up until now have been less vulnerable to that, right? If you were an auto worker building cars, then what I'm talking about has definitely been affecting that segment of the economy for decades. Similarly, if you're a farmer or many other, you were in, building construction, again, big machines and things like that allow that construction to be done still by people, but with far fewer people. But now, if you look at what we might traditionally call knowledge work, white collar work, a machine wasn't going to take the place of a lawyer or an accountant or a marketing executive, or a wide range, a salesperson, right? A wide range of other more, let's just say white collar jobs, because those weren't really suitable to be done by machine. And in fact, one of the things we've seen over the last number of decades is a massive shift of the percentage of the population that was working in what we might classically call, blue collar, what the type of jobs that Labor Day is really meant to celebrate, right? Workers versus people who are in office jobs, knowledge jobs, executive jobs, management jobs, professions like law, accounting, medicine, etc. And so you can just see from this diagram, even if you can't read all the text, essentially what this is showing is in 1900, it was less than 20% of people in the United States were in something that you might call a white collar job. And when, unfortunately, I couldn't find super recent data. This data is from like 2006, 2007. And by then it was up to 60%. And I can only assume that in the last 15, 16 years, that this line has only continued, if not gone at a higher inflection. This is data from the US Census Bureau. So it may be that when all of the new census data is fully analyzed and processed, we'll see some new numbers like this. But this is what I have so far. But you can see the graph in general is this move away from more blue collar jobs and manufacturing and labor jobs towards more of these types of white collar jobs. But what's going to happen next? Because one of the big technology evolutions that we're seeing is the implementation of things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so the technology is being built that can start to replace some of these other types of roles, medical diagnoses being done by technology, legal opinions being created by technology, marketing recommendations and strategies being created by technology, et cetera. Now, some of this is still not completely ready for prime time. There's no question, though, that already today, companies are improving the productivity and effectiveness of, let's take marketing, for example, much more effectively targeting the right message to the right person. There was a day when people would sit in a conference room and try to figure out, which ad should go in which magazine so we can get the right message in front of the right person to sell our products. We may, if we're advertising Coca-Cola, we probably put a different ad in Sports Illustrated than we put in Time Magazine because it's a different audience, right? And that type of thinking work, decision-making work, is being increasingly taken over by various types of digital tools, artificial intelligence, et cetera. So as this trend continues, I think we can expect to see some of what happened to the blue collar jobs as they became mechanized. The AI is now in a position to do that for many types of white collar jobs. But of course, you might ask the question, well, wait a minute, if we shifted from the blue collar jobs, the labor jobs, like we're celebrating on Labor Day, to these office jobs, white collar jobs, and now technology could potentially take the place of those jobs, where do those jobs shift to? Is there like another category, another color of collar? I don't know. And I don't have an answer to that. But I think that this is one of the challenges of employment that we face as a society going forward, is as we continue to build technology that can do more and more of the work that needs to be done, and we have this massive increase in productivity, other than the people who are building that technology. And maybe I'm fortunate, that's my business, right? Is creating those types of things. But if you're not in that business, then might there be less and less need for human labor? And if so, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because here's another graph, and I promise this is the only other graph I'm going to show you today. So don't think there's 10 more graphs coming. This is the growth in productivity. And if you look at the blue line, this is the effect from 1970 to 2010. Again, I wish I had some slightly more recent data of the impact of technology on the productivity of people in the US. And you can see that it's a not quite tripling, more than doubling of productivity as a result of technology. And again, this graph stops around 2012. So imagine since then, mobility and artificial intelligence, machine learning, all the things I was just talking about, you can only assume that this graph continues up or even, goes up at an even steeper rate. So there's all this increased productivity that we're getting from our more digital world. It's a question, of course, sometimes of a sort of a social engineering issue. Who's benefiting from that? Before I address that question, though, there's another big thing that's going on right now, which hasn't really been an issue in quite a number of years, which is we're facing this labor shortage. And in industry after industry, and when I'm with my clients, I hear this almost every day, that one of the biggest things holding them back right now is they can't get all their jobs filled. Some of my clients have thousands and thousands and thousands of unfilled jobs. And there's all kinds of reasons for this, and I'm not going to try to get into it. Some of it's politics. People feel that the economic policy might not have been right, the unemployment insurance extensions. There are other factors as well, and I'm not even going to try to get into it here, because the main point isn't so much why we have a labor shortage. Labor shortages can happen for a combination of reasons. Obviously, it's all connected to COVID, but it's a question of what aspect of COVID. But the point is that this is another pressure on businesses to say, if I have a labor shortage, that's another reason to try to move more in the direction of automation, machine learning. I mean, after all, if your business is suffering because you don't have enough people to do the jobs, it's at least worth asking the question, could we be applying technology? If I have a restaurant that's normally run by 20 people and I can only get 8 people, it's naturally asked the question, well, if we used, digital ordering, right? If we could that cut out half the people? You don't have to talk to your waiter until he brings you your food. You can just order on your phone. There are platforms to do that. And now all of a sudden, with that one change, and by the way, that's also how you could pay. So now instead of having to take your order, bring you your food, and then help you pay, the waiter only does one of those 3 things, brings you the food. Now all of a sudden, maybe you don't need as many waiters and waitresses to run your restaurant. And in a labor shortage, that sounds pretty darn good. So for companies that are in the business of helping with self-service checkout, for example, or other means that require fewer humans, this trend is going to be pushed further forward, I predict here. And I believe this is already happening, not only by the fact that you can do it and the possibility of the cost savings, but also by the absence of enough people to fill these roles. And so, it naturally begs the question for any business, how much do we want to stay human? And how much do we want to be focusing on automation, AI, and other means of replacing humans? And again, I think this is an interesting topic to look at on Labor Day, a day we celebrate labor, because technology has the potential to help reduce the amount of labor that we need to engage in as a society. But of course, that has potentially, if you're the person who's told you're no longer needed and you're fired, and now you're on unemployment, that doesn't sound like such a great thing. That doesn't sound like progress, right? That sounds like, how am I going to feed my family? But there's certainly a number of reasons why when you evaluate or weigh the human labor versus technology as a way of doing the labor, whether you're talking about blue collar or white collar labor, there are certainly some benefits to technology. What are some of the benefits? Let me offer you 5 benefits of technology. And then I think there are certainly some benefits of humans as well. But I think you can make a pretty strong case. First of all, one of the challenges of humans is that they're unpredictable, right? They get sick. They're moody. They don't always do things consistently. They don't always check their work carefully. Now, you can try to hire the best people you can, but the reality is, humans are imperfect and unpredictable. Technology sometimes breaks, that's true, but I would argue that technology tends to be much, much more predictable than humans. If I had 1,000 math problems that I needed done and I handed the 1,000 math problems to the human and I put the same 1,000 math problems in the computer, is it possible the computer would make a mistake? Could it break down? Could it crash? It's possible, but most likely the computer is going to get a much better score. The second thing is humans have to be trained. You hire someone into a job and you have to actually take time and train them. It's not like the Matrix, right? Where they insert the chip in his head or whatever they did and he says, I know Kung Fu, right? That's not, unfortunately, anything we can do with I don't know if it would be a good thing if we could do that, but in any case, the Matrix is fairly dystopian. But the point is, this is what computers can do, of course. You can buy a program, you can load that program. Now your computer has new capabilities. So bottom line is, humans have to be trained. That takes time and money. Humans get tired and they have limited working hours. You can buy a machine and run it possibly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you look back to where the human labor force was in the 19th century, as we said at the beginning of this live cast, they were working workers 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That even still was only half of their waking hours, because even then they had to rest and sleep and eat. And of course, that was rather extreme and no doubt terrible for the workers, I assume. So today we have laws and protections, et cetera. And humans are, you're going to hire someone, they're only going to work for you 40, 50 hours a week. Even someone working super hard, 60, 70 hours a week, which is, probably not the best thing for that person, is nothing like the kind of, what's the word? Not durability, the persistence and the continuous work that you can get out of some type of technology. And frankly, there are laws protecting humans about the way you treat them and how hard you work them and things like that. So wide range of challenges with humans having work done. Now, of course, there's some huge benefits to humans. They understand, they have much deeper empathy, or they have empathy to begin with. And very often they can think in ways that computers can't. And so there's certainly, without a doubt, work that needs to be done, which humans are far better at. And even with the most sophisticated robotics is often not as able to, sometimes able to do things as delicate and sophisticated as things that humans can do. Of course, though, humans aren't getting a lot better. Like the next two generations of humans are probably not going to be way smarter, have way more stamina or be more dexterous than humans today, most likely. Whereas technology over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years is probably going to continue to improve. So this trend that we see, which I've tried to lay out, goes back more than 100 years, of technology being able to take more and more of our work off of us as humans, even as our lifestyle has continued to improve. Humans sort of being the lesser and lesser desirable way of getting any particular task done, continues apace. And as technology becomes more sophisticated, fewer and fewer of the sort of human jobs are out of reach of technology. There was a time when, sure, you could have a bulldozer, but all they could do was push dirt around. It wasn't going to be able to build a building. Now you can 3D print a building with technology, and you can do so many more things. So I think we can expect this trend to continue. And I think that's interesting because it kind of begs the question, well, what's the future of labor? We talk about the future of work today. And so often when I hear people talk about the future of work, a lot of it is about remote work. And clearly remote work is a very important topic today. But, remote work kind of pointed something out that maybe is less obvious than the main thing. What most people realized during COVID is that it's not so critical for people to be in the office, right? You can have people working from home, and they can often be just as effective and sometimes even more effective in many, many, many jobs. There are exceptions, of course, that you can't do remotely, but many, many jobs can be effectively done remotely. And technology, of course, has enabled that. But, here's the part that I don't think people are thinking about as much. As soon as you start to say, well, I actually don't need a person in the office. I don't need someone sitting at that desk doing this work. It can be someone who's just showing up on Zoom. As long as I get the files, as long as I get the information, as long as the workflow is continuing, I don't actually need a person sitting here. That's one step closer to the question of, do I even need a person at all? If I have a given job, let's take being an editor. And I used to have an editor of like a newspaper editor. I used to sit in the newsroom and edit all the copy of all the journalists. Okay, great. And now all of a sudden that editor can sit at home. But that makes it even easier to swap that editor out with, an AI program that acts as an editor. And so I would argue that what's happened with COVID is great because it liberates humans from the need to commute and always being in the office. And I certainly appreciate that. And I think it's a wonderful thing. But I want to point out that it also psychologically puts those human beings one step farther from the work itself and paves the path even more for a future in which more and more jobs are taken over by technology. And so, I want to end with this thought, and it's like, so is this good or bad, right? If there's more and more work being taken over by technology, if you look at it from a traditional economic perspective, you might say, well, this is bad for workers. This is bad for labor. Here we are on Labor Day celebrating workers, but in fact, we're kind of screwing them over, right? We have this huge societal push to digitize things, which, today we still need those workers, but in the long run, we may just not need them very much. other than the workers who keep our technology running. And eventually we may create technology that keeps our technology running, right? And we need fewer and fewer. And it starts to sound more and more like some kind of dystopian movie. But I would point out that there was a time when we needed workers to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we managed to figure out how to create a middle class in this country and in the world, not everywhere in the world, but many places other than the United States. And Henry Ford did it because he wanted his workers to be able to afford his cars. He said, I want my workers to have time off and be able to make money during the 40 hours a week so they can have a life, and they're going to turn around and want to buy an automobile and obviously other consumer goods, et cetera, and make a thriving economy. And so, maybe, and I'll just toss this out. I mean, the question is, who benefits from the surplus? Who benefits from this increase in productivity as technology can do more and more for us? Is it only, some people at the top or people who have big share ownership in large technology companies, and the worker, speaking here again on Labor Day, is left out because they're less and less and less needed? Or might it be that this technology trend that we're seeing contributes to the same type of evolution of work that the original creation of Labor Day was focused on? Because Labor Day was celebrating the fact that mechanization and technology had gotten to the point that someone like Henry Ford could be successful and could be profitable and pay his workers a good wage, even if they only worked 40-ish hours a week, even if they only worked 5 days a week. And that was very successful for a long time. As technology has continued to increase the productivity dividend that it brings us, as I showed at that graph earlier, maybe that number is going to go down. We're seeing how technology is allowing us to be more remote from our work. Maybe we're headed towards the 3-day work week or the 2-day work week, a world in which people can spend fewer and fewer hours because more and more of the tasks that they would otherwise do are handled by some kind of technology. That's not necessarily my hard and fast prediction, but I think it's worth at least considering in a moment on a holiday when we're meant to be celebrating the worker. What is the future for the worker in a world where, at least from a human perspective, there's less and less work to do? So those are my comments for Labor Day, and as an aside, for Rosh Hashanah, even though I didn't talk about that very much. So, hey, welcome back. I'm excited to be back to our 2-day-a-week live cast schedule, which I'll be doing through the end of the year, possibly a day or two off here and there for things like Thanksgiving and all that. And I love any of your comments and feedback on anything I talked about today. Maybe some of it's controversial. If you think I'm totally wrong, by all means, I want to hear that. And of course, if you support it or you have a way to further the thinking of what I've talked about here today, please put that stuff in the comments. We really love that. So that's it for today. Happy Labor Day. Happy back to school. Happy Rosh Hashanah and the Jewish high holidays, or whatever it is that you're celebrating. Look forward to spending more time with you in the coming months ahead. And as always, keep transforming.